This episode of On the Beat is brought to you by Engles. Shop online with Engles Curbside Pickup. New curbside stores opening every week. Please welcome Mike Griffith.
Well, hey everybody, Mike Griffith here, and welcome to this week's On the Beat. Second half of the show today, I'm going to be joined by Michael Broughton of that SEC podcast it's called. We're going to talk about the national picture. We're going to talk about some very controversial questions about the SEC and national football scene, get into future coaches and all sorts of fun. But right now, I want to talk about the win over Kentucky. I can't get enough of it, 51-13. This was a big win for Georgia over Kentucky. I think I said last week I felt confident Georgia was going to get this win, and in dominant fashion. Kentucky, just not a good matchup, right? You got to have a great quarterback to beat Georgia. You think about the last four quarterbacks to beat Georgia, and they're all on NFL rosters. Kyle Trask, Mac Jones, Bryce Young, and Joe Burrow, okay? And Devin Leary was not that guy. And you saw that. He had open guys. He couldn't hit them. Kentucky could not answer the bell early on, and Mark Stoops actually said there was no reason that he shouldn't have been able to complete some of those passes. Something else that I noted, we often hear Kirby talk about how the Georgia Bulldogs talk with their helmets, and what does that mean? Well, I noted when Brock Vanderbilt threw a touchdown pass on fourth down in the end zone, it put Georgia over the 50-point mark. And Kirby's not one for aesthetics, and he's typically not one to run the score up. But if you'll remember, there were some Kentucky players that threw some pretty big cheap shots early in the game. Cedric Van Pran was decked unsuspectingly away from the ball. There was another Kentucky player that jumped on the back of a Georgia player many yards away from the play. There was some chippy and unsportsmanlike things going on. And as Kirby said, the Dogs talked with their helmets, and they took care of that on the scoreboard by lighting Kentucky up for 51 points. Easily the most impressive effort of the year for Georgia. Not sure how that would have played out against another top 10 team, but it played out well at Sanford Stadium on Saturday night, and it was what Georgia needed at this time. The Dogs, of course, travel to play Vanderbilt in a noon kickoff Saturday, and then they have a bye week, and then they play Florida in Jacksonville, and then they get into what looks like the meat of the schedule. You saw Missouri was leading LSU for quite some time in that game before LSU came back and was able to win that game in Columbia, Missouri. We've seen Ole Miss. They beat LSU earlier this year. Their only loss at Alabama. That is a dangerous team with Jackson Dart. And then, of course, the game at Tennessee will be there for our Dog Nation invasion. That's going to be quite a trip. I know many of you have already purchased your riverboat tickets. There's going to be a large faction of Georgia fans in Neyland Stadium. So the way things are setting up, Kirby Smart and Georgia have to be happy with where they're at this point in the season. But this is only the first half. This is only the first 6 games. This is a schedule that's backloaded. And what needs to happen for Georgia moving forward? Well, you already saw how Carson Beck can sling it. But still, he did have a pick in the second half that was a careless throw. That was not good. And Kirby Smart said today they monitored this closely. There's still a couple of plays a game where they want Carson to be careful with the football and make better decisions. I think you'll see that. I think his growth is impressive. He's one of the top 5 passers in the country. I'm not surprised by this, and you shouldn't be either. There's a reason why Todd Monken had Carson Beck ahead of Stetson Bennett on the depth chart for quite some time earlier in his career. This is a very talented player with NFL arm talent. It's always been about how does Carson handle adversity and what does he do under pressure, and we've seen that. He came from 10 points down against Auburn in a very impressive road win last week. You saw him come from 10 points down in a home win against South Carolina, and then you saw him light up Kentucky with a very aggressive game plan that turned him loose early. So you've seen Carson. As much as it's on Carson, it's about the parts around him, though, right? You saw this last game, Daijun Edwards had 6 catches. Previously, he'd never had more than 2 catches in the game. Georgia had been missing that element of throwing the ball to the backside of the backfield. Daijun showed you he could do that. The other thing that was very important, we saw a healthy Kendall Milton. That's as good as Kendall's looked since the SEC championship game. He looked dynamic. This is important. Like Kirby said, Mike Bobo was talking, said, hey, Dogs need somebody that can get 3 or 4 yards of pop. We know Daijun's pretty good. We know Kendall Milton has a very high ceiling, and now he's healthy. The other thing you saw that was very important, Ra Thomas, that was his first touchdown catch as a Georgia Bulldog. It was also the first time he went over 60 yards. Kirby said that Ra Thomas is the most important person to emerge. And the reason why is because he plays that X position, that feature receiving position where Donnie Mitchell and George Pickens had lined up before. You've got to have a guy that can win a one-on-one battle over there. And that's what takes that safety out of the middle of center field and makes him shade 2-on-1. And then you're playing 10-on-9 the rest of the field. So very important for Ra Thomas to emerge. You saw Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint. He had a long touchdown catch and run to get production out of the X position, to get some sort of versatility out of the offensive backfield. So what's left? Those offensive tackle positions have to be shorn up. I do think Ernest Green has made strides. Each week he's gotten better and better and better at left tackle. At the right tackle position, I think Xavier Trust is doing fine. It will be better when Amarius Mims gets back. Georgia will have their offensive line back. Defensively, Kirby said, as lopsided as those statistics were, the defense wasn't as good as the numbers suggest, and you saw it. You saw some receivers running open. You saw Kentucky have some degree of success running the football, not as dominant as Kirby wants it to be. Of course, the last 2 years, defense has set the standard. You're not going to suddenly have a Jalen Carter come out of the tunnel, but the middle of the defensive line is getting better. It's getting stronger, and I saw much better play on the edge. I think the linebacker play is outstanding. Kirby divulged that JDJ had been playing injured a little bit, so I still thought JDJ had a very good game, but he'll tell you he can get better. Jamon Dumas-Johnson told us there's better days ahead for the defense even after that game. And this secondary is just lights out right now. So you're seeing Georgia make some good progress. They're getting better and better. Peyton Woodring made all 3 of his field goals, including a career long. And poor Brett Thorson, the Australian punter, just doesn't get many chances. Return game, Muse had a punt return called back on kind of a questionable block in the back call. But on another one, he let it roll. It got inside the 10. Kirby not happy. So Kirby is maintaining this incredibly high standard. And the reason why is because he wants that 3rd national title. Right now, this winning streak is at 23 games. Georgia has passed 2008 and 2009 Florida, the Swamp Kings, right? So to me, this means officially now there will have to be a documentary about these Georgia Bulldogs. If they won more games in a row in the playoff era, which I think this is the most competitive era in college football history with a unified title and extended seasons because of playoffs, I think it's a heck of a lot harder to go 15-0 than maybe some of these teams of the leather helmet era that would win 8 or 9 to win national titles. So what you're seeing before your eyes, these are the good old days at Georgia. You're seeing Kirby Smart take this program places that's never been. And my goodness, is that not a mouthful when you consider what Vince Dooley and Herschel Walker's teams did here in the early 1980s. In fact, I think if Georgia wins their next 2 home games, they'll match the longest home winning streak. Maybe it's the next home game where they will match the longest home winning streak in Georgia history that was set by those Vince Dooley Bulldogs that featured Herschel Walker. Already a school record number of consecutive wins at 23 games and already the back-to-back national titles. So these are all things most of you already know, but don't forget, you want to fill in these, check these boxes, fill in these blanks, understand and appreciate what is happening before your eyes. Tim Tebow told us if there was one thing that he would do different when he was at Florida during their 22-game win streak to help his team, it would be to enjoy the wins more. It would be to not compare so much from one year to the next, but enjoy each win because of how hard it is. That's good advice for the fan base. It's easy to say after that win over Kentucky, certainly, because that was easily the most impressive win of the year. I thought Georgia really throttled down, and you got to give kudos to Kirby. He pulled out every motivational trick. He challenged their manhood. He used the science of mass times velocity equaling force. He showed videos of a wrecking ball going through. There wasn't much he did not do to push the buttons and get those Georgia Bulldogs ready. And then, of course, the crowd at Stanford Stadium showed up in force. And they were also a factor. They caused Kentucky some trouble early on. So I want to set that up. We're going to get into the second half of the show. Just a second. I want to thank our sponsor, Engles. I want you to check out this ad from Engles. Without them, we couldn't do this show every Monday night. And after this message from Engles, we'll bring on Michael Bratton, and you're going to get a lot of SEC football opinions. Stay with us, and please take note of this message from our sponsor, Engles.
Did you know that Engles sells more organics than any other store? Or that they run their own dairy? Or that they only serve USDA choice and prime meat? Did you know that they have more local craft beer than any place else? Or that they have Energy Smart stores? Or that they professionally slice and package imported cheese from Europe? Did you know about their giant international aisle, local farm partnerships, curbside pickup, wine department? Or that they donate 3,956 meals a day to local food banks? Well, now you do. It's all in the bag. Engles, low prices, love the savings.
Welcome back to the program. Now joined by Michael Breton of That SEC Podcast. Did I say that right, Mike?
Yes, sir. That SEC Podcast, highest rated podcast on Apple and Spotify.
Love it. You do a great job on that. Have a lot of fun and give out a lot of information. And certainly appreciate your friendship and all the work you do. Always good seeing you at all the SEC media events. So, Michael, I guess I'll just start off the top with your view from 10,000 feet. We're not quite at the halfway point of the SEC season, but I think we've seen enough of it now to have a feel. Give me your top three storylines for Southeastern Conference football this season.
Well, the biggest one, Mike, and, this is not groundbreaking news or anything, but it appears to me that the league is down overall. And I've been among the most vocal saying Georgia is down as well. Of course, they kind of smashed that narrative over the weekend. So, it really does seem to be Georgia and everybody else, and that includes Alabama. I don't get, I've been very vocal too. I don't think Alabama's winning the West. They probably will now that they beat A&M, but they don't look that good to me. I mean, they're scraping by to beat, a god-awful coach, Jimbo Fisher. They're just inept on offense outside of a couple deep shots. But from 2 to 12, I don't see much of a difference between any of these teams. And when maybe Mississippi State and Vanderbilt are the exception, they're on the low end, whereas everybody else, there's a glut in the middle. And I think that is the biggest storyline. And if heaven forbid Georgia loses a game or loses an SEC championship, I think that's why we got Kirby out here saying, hey, the entire SEC should be ranked. They could all beat us. We know that's not true, but he's already getting in front of it, Mike. And he's saying this is a gargantuan task going through this SEC. I don't think it is this year. So, I think Georgia's the only hope now for the SEC to get a playoff team in. That's got to be my number one storyline. Number two is nobody wants to step up and win the West is what it looks like to me. I mean, my goodness, A&M had it there for the taking. I think LSU's had it for the taking. They, for some reason, are just a complete no-show on defense with probably 2 or 3 first-round picks on the defensive side of the ball, yet they're just awful on that side of the ball. So who's stepping up there out of the West? And then, it's kind of the East. I think back to the East, it's, these teams like Missouri and Kentucky making an appearance there, and maybe they're the best team, or second best team, obviously, to Georgia, because I still don't think that's Tennessee. Maybe they can prove me wrong here on Saturday, but then after that, they got Alabama. So I think Tennessee very well could be staring down the barrel of 2 consecutive losses before they even get to road trips to Kentucky and Missouri. So who's that number 2 threat in the? And it's really not a threat to Georgia, but who's that second team? I think it's going to be Kentucky or Missouri.
Yeah, it's interesting. Michael, you talk about the SEC being down, and those early games really hurt. Texas beating Alabama in Tuscaloosa, Florida State beating LSU, A&M losing at Miami. Those are difficult out-of-conference losses that really shape the opinion of the SEC, and you don't usually see that. And there was no Georgia out there to carry the flag like there had been the last 2 years when they, put a pretty good beating on Oregon, and the year before beat Clemson in Charlotte, North Carolina, which is like a second home stadium for the Tigers. So, those early wins by Georgia really did well for the league. And, to your point about Kirby getting out in front of it, I think you're right. We've kind of gotten used to, for a little bit, seeing 2 SEC teams make the playoff. But, you're right. It's fair to ask, if Georgia loses one game, if the SEC, and it's in the SEC championship game, to a 2-loss West team, is it out of the realm of possibility that the SEC gets shut out of the playoff? I think I tend to believe that the SEC will get in, but I think it's very shaky whether or not a one-loss Georgia would get in if they lost to a two-loss team from the West. I don't think it's a given this year at this time. Now, we'll see if Georgia continues to beat the brakes off teams like they did Kentucky the other night. That was an impressive win in Sanford Stadium. And in hindsight, maybe we made too much of Kentucky because they beat Florida. But Florida beat Tennessee, right? So we're playing all these transitive properties. And I think that plays into what you said about, teams 2 through 12 not being that much different. I think I give Alabama a little bit more credit than you do. Maybe I go 3 through 9. But your point is well taken. This has been a very topsy-turvy, week-to-week year as the league looks to reload from losing 3 quarterbacks in the first round and 2 top 5 Heisman finalists. So let me ask you this. Right now, if I was going to ask you for your first-team quarterback in the SEC, you only get to pick one. Which quarterback are you picking as the best quarterback in the SEC so far this season?
I think I'd have to go Jaden Daniels, and that's kind of remarkable considering his team has lost multiple games. But I don't think that's what you're asking me. You're asking me, who's been the most outstanding quarterback, and it's not his fault that he's scoring. I believe they're averaging 43.8 points per game. That's essentially what Tennessee did last year. If you're scoring 43 points per game, you should be winning your games. But unfortunately for him, again, their defense is just god-awful. And I don't know, it's not like I thought they would be the new Georgia or anything like that, but I thought they would be able to hold teams under 20. But, it's the other day, Mike, when they were playing Missouri and they got a interception in like the second quarter, that seemed to give them so much momentum because they sat here and said, my God, we can stop somebody. I don't think they had seen it all season long. So you get one stop, and in a weird way, when your defense is that terrible, it gives you so much juice because you just stole a possession and you kept Missouri from scoring a touchdown. They don't give up field goal drives. They give up touchdown drives in Baton Rouge. And obviously the second pick six, that completely broke Missouri there at the end of the game. That's why it was a 2-score game. But, I think it's Jaden Daniels, and he's playing hurt. He's playing just phenomenal football. And I know he's got 2 great receivers. They've got the running game going now. That's why I think LSU can still win the West. I'm not picking them because the defense is so bad, but they have a puncher's chance to run the table and meet Georgia once again in the SEC championship. I really do believe that.
Yep, if they can go to Tuscaloosa and take down the Crimson Tide, they've only got one SEC loss, and that was at Ole Miss. So we will see. A halfway point, we're going to call it the halfway point. It's close. We've got 6 games in the books. That's half of the regular season. 3 of them are in the SEC. Who's your SEC Coach of the Year at this halfway point of the season?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would almost.
I love putting you on the spot like this. I love putting you on the spot like this because there's not enough time to really think.
Right. I would give it to Drake, and I'll tell you why. Not that I think Missouri's some world beater, but this is a coach that I think anybody asked, even though he got an extension, we know those are not always worth the paper they're printed on, but he was sitting on a hot seat here. The fans were literally booing his choice to run Brady Cook out there against Kansas State, and that was, 3 weeks ago. And you want to talk about a quarterback that has completely won over that fan base in a span of 3 weeks. Look no further than Brady Cook. So I think the job Drink has done at Missouri is impressive. But again, I hesitate to even give that answer because they're playing at Kentucky this week. They still got Tennessee. They've got South Carolina. They've got many losable games. So that may look like a foolish answer here in as soon as a month. But I don't know that there's an obvious choice right now for SEC Coach of the Year. I was ready to give it to Jimbo till Saturday. Now I think he's back on the hot seat too, or at least he should be.
I think it's interesting, and I think that's one of the candidates I thought. I thought about Lane Kiffin, and I thought about Hugh Freeze for a quality loss against Georgia, I guess. But isn't it interesting, Michael, how we just glossed right over Kirby Smart and how they've won now 23 straight games, which surpasses the Florida streak that Urban Meyer and Tim Tebow put together, and to do it despite all of the attrition. So we know about the 34 Georgia players that have been picked in the last 3 drafts. There was 9, then there was 15, Then there was 10 last year. And you say, well, every team, every great team loses players. But I think what makes me say Kirby is the addition of the portal in the NIL. So here's a stat for you. There's 16 former Georgia players on the two deep of other FBS rosters, and there's 11 that are starting for other teams. And when we looked at last weekend, I saw Jermaine Burton with 197 yards for Alabama. I saw Major Burns with that pick six for LSU that you referenced. Of course, Adonai Mitchell is now doing great things at Texas. I saw Bear Alexander with 4 tackles for USC. There was an era when there weren't that many transfers. And so for Georgia to continue to win, and I don't know that this argument would have been this strong before the big win over Kentucky, but for them to continue to win and remain elite with all the attrition, not just from the NFL perspective, but the transfer portal, I just don't think any other coach has had that challenge before. And the fact that Kirby has won these 23 straight games, 23 straight at home, it's pretty remarkable in this day and age of parity, as you say. I don't know that Georgia's really that much above everybody else in the SEC went from a roster perspective. I feel like Alabama's got a lot of talent. A lot's been made at A&M. But the way that they're coached makes them look like that they're – and we'll see. Like you said, I don't think Vanderbilt is a threat for Georgia. Then they have a bye week. Then they play Florida and Jacksonville, which I don't really put on the upset radar. They do play Missouri at home. That's big. Then they play Ole Miss at home. And then they play at Tennessee. Before I get too far, though, into Georgia, I want to ask you about Vanderbilt. And I think Vanderbilt's seating capacity right now is, 28 or 30,000. Michael, this is the school that gets the same share of money as every other team in the league. Is this a problem? Does someone need to step in and tell Vanderbilt to get it together, or is it a little bit different because it's a private school in Nashville? Where do you stand on where Vanderbilt's at in terms of holding up their end of the bargain in the league?
Well, I think the vast majority of the coaches, Mike, in the SEC are fine because they appreciate that extra bye, that extra home game. But, yeah, I know you've been beating this drum for a while. It's disgraceful that they get all these the financial earnings, same as Georgia, same as Alabama, given their lack of commitment, not only to I think most people look at it and they just say, well, they're not committed to, the stadium and getting a competent coach in there. And that's not to call out Clark Lee because, I think he's done an admirable job. Not, the team seems to have taken a little bit of a step back, but they are not at all focused on NIL in terms of attracting talent. Their NIL is primarily on keeping their players in there. But, from people I talk to that cover that program on a daily basis, Mike, they're not even committed to the student athletes. And I think that's the biggest offense of all of Vanderbilt with all this money they're getting. I mean, you hear stories, Mike, where for an entire summer, and we all know what summer's like in the South with the heat and humidity, entire summer they don't even have air conditioning in the building. Where they don't even have a loading zone for equipment drop off, and it's just sitting in the hallway. And I'm talking not just equipment, but food and things of that nature. I mean, it's comically poor how they run that thing. And yeah, I do think someone needs to step up and demand at least some level of commitment. And to their credit, they're doing it with these new facilities that are not going to be done for about 2 or 3 years, as I understand it. So this is going to be looking like this for a while. This is not a quick turnaround by any means, but it is a problem because you see the likes of Northwestern and Duke, and these schools have shown that you can put forth a commitment. I think Northwestern may have, one of the nicest facilities in the country, and they're not winning the Big Ten anytime soon. It's not about them trying to win every Big Ten title or Vanderbilt trying to win SEC titles, but at least put the investment in, put in what some of these other programs are getting, and let's have Vanderbilt. Let's not have them being the joke of the conference, an extra bye, because that's what they are, and it's an extra home game for Kirby and company come Saturday. You know as well as I, there's going to be far more red than there is black or gold in that stadium come Saturday.
Yeah, there will. And, one of the local radio stations here said that Vanderbilt's gouging the student tickets of over $170 for, obviously tickets will be at a premium for folks that do want to travel. It's just disappointing to me, because when I think about the SEC and, it just means more slogan. And I think for the most part it does, but Vanderbilt's kind of become that house in the neighborhood that doesn't, cut their grass. And it's just kind of embarrassing and unnecessary. And again, I don't know. Maybe there has been some level of accountability behind the scenes, but there has not been any public comments made. And I don't know. Maybe Greg Sankey would say that's out of bounds, or that's not something that would be publicly said. But it is disappointing because it wasn't that long ago. And I reminded Kirby Smart of this at his press conference. Vanderbilt beat Kirby Smart in Georgia here in Athens in 2016 in a noon game. And Vanderbilt does have some impressive wins. There was a time when there was a 10-year span when they were 500 with Tennessee over a 10-year span, believe it or not. I want to talk a little bit more about Tennessee. I know that's the state that you reside in, and these Tennessee Vols under Josh Hypo. A moment ago, you were talking about the East, and at the beginning of the year, we all kind of gravitated towards that Georgia at Tennessee game. Is it too early to say that that's a Georgia walk? Just how much of a threat can Tennessee be? What do you need to see from the Vols to believe that they could potentially be the team to end Georgia's streak in Neyland Stadium?
Well, we need to be a lot more efficient on the offensive side of the ball before we can see a team like Tennessee be a true threat to Georgia, because what Tennessee has turned into, for those that have not really watched, they're essentially a running team now. And heck, I heard Kentucky was a running team, Mike, until they went up against their dogs. Then they had nothing. You know what I mean? So, and that's why I fear for Tennessee's chances this upcoming week against that Texas A&M defensive front. Similar thing, and I realize A&M and Georgia are two different entities there, but I don't know. Joe Milton, it just looks, every time he throws it, it looks labored. We know, it's been said ad nauseum, and even I'm tired of hearing it as an alum of the school, that he can throw it 90 yards. That's fantastic. He can't seem to hit a slant. He can't seem to make that 20-yard pass when it's there that Hendon Hooker made time and time again. He can hit the home run balls, but even those, they've been dropping them. So the passing attack is not there. Tennessee's the number one rushing offense in the SEC. I believe they're top 5 in the country. But I just don't think you can attack Georgia that way. Now, one thing I think that's being lost in all this shuffle is Tennessee has made great strides on the defensive side of the ball. Now, I know it didn't look like it against Florida. That was their true test. But prior to that, they looked great. And that's where they have really been focusing a ton of effort on the recruiting trail. It started to pay off. And then that debacle at Florida. But then that South Carolina game, the season was on the line. And Spencer Rattler, Georgia fans know all too well. He was my answer to the SEC's best quarterback. But Tennessee solved him. He had a horrific performance against Tennessee. And it wasn't necessarily all on him. It was because he was running for his life. He's down weapons. They have no running game. So, it's essentially the Spencer Rattler show and nothing else. And Tennessee, corralled him. And that's why they won in such dominant fashion. And the offense still had issues. They were able to run on South Carolina. But again, I just don't think that's going to happen against Georgia. I don't think it's going to happen against A&M. And I don't think it's going to happen in Tuscaloosa either. So what happens when you take that away from Tennessee? You force Joe Milton to beat you. And nothing we have seen indicates that he can do that. Now, he's been banged up too. So coming off a bye week, maybe he's a little bit more healthy. They need to get him more involved in the ground game. When they did that against, I think it was UTSA right out the gate, he actually had the longest run, Mike, a Tennessee quarterback has had in the history of the program. It was an 81-yard run, I believe. If they add that wrinkle, I think that does something for you. But it's all about the downfield passing, which has not been there. And the fact that Brew McCoy, one of probably their most physically imposing receiver, lost for the season due to injury, that's certainly not going to help matters.
One of the reasons that I had you on today, Mike, is that you're not afraid to put your opinions out there. And it can be dangerous. But you know what? We're in the opinion business, and we do our research and we do our homework, and we make educated guesses, and sometimes we're not right, but that's all right. It's better than saying, "Oh shucks, I don't know, maybe not." I mean, come on, we all have opinions and we all have perspectives and reasons, and you and I are two guys that don't mind putting those things out there. So with that in mind, I'm going to ask you some tough questions now. I don't want to call them hot seat questions because I don't need answers in 3 seconds, but I do like that you put your opinions out there. So my first question to you is, will Nick Saban win another national championship before he retires?
No.
Simple as that. Not will he play for one?
Not as long as Kirby's in Athens, Mike, because
okay.
I don't think so. No.
Okay, here's one for you. Now, Mark Stoops is the longer tenured coach at a Power 5 school to have never won his division. It's pretty well documented. He's 0-11 against Georgia. Will he ever beat Georgia before he leaves Kentucky?
Same answer. Not as long as Kirby's there. I mean, Mark Stoops, he is what he is. He's done a fine job for the Kentucky Wildcats, and give him credit. He's a C+ coach, and that's not me saying it. This is what people that get paid to grade these coaches and help with the hirings say about him. He rarely ever beats a team that has more talent than him, and we're just basing off recruiting rankings. And when he does, like a Florida game, he turns around and drops a Vanderbilt game, which recruits below him. So what's that tell you? He's a C+ coach. So no.
Will Shane Beamer ever be the head coach at Virginia Tech?
Ooh, that's a good one. I sure bet they would like that.
No, I need a yes or a no here. I want you to look into the crystal ball. Mm-hmm. Is that going to be in the future? Is he young? He's 47, 46 years old? Or do you think he's a Carolina guy? These are tough questions. It's a yes or a no.
I would say no at Virginia Tech, but I do not think he's a lifer at South Carolina. I think another program will get him.
All right, here's one for you. Will Josh Hypo ever be the head coach at Oklahoma?
I don't think so, because to my understanding, I know that's a popular thing to throw out there, but he has no relationship with Oklahoma. That's kind of a bridge that has burned. They even honored the national championship team, or I think either they did it in the spring or they're going to do it, and he will not attend. And of course, he was the quarterback of that team. He has no relationship with Oklahoma, so I think that ship has sailed.
Who's the next head coach at Alabama?
Believe it or not, Mike, I was hyping up Mario Cristobal until this weekend. So it won't be him, but I think a guy that Georgia knows well, Dan Lanning. I certainly think he's got to be at the top of that list. And I've even heard Steve Sarkisian floated out there, Mike. But I honestly think Sarkisian's got a better job than Nick Saban. Well, not Nick Saban, than the job after Nick Saban, because the expectation at Alabama will be sky high for the next guy. And I would rather stay at Texas with all the resources. And I know they have expectations, but they don't have Alabama Nick Saban expectations. So give me Dan Lanning. I think he's kind of the popular one right now that I like.
Going with Dan Lanning. I was thinking D'Amico Ryans, Dabo Swinney. How about the next head coach at Florida? See, that's where I had Lanning going to Florida. Who do you got up next at Florida? And will Billy Napier be the Florida head coach on opening day next season?
I mean, it would not. I have not gotten caught up in all this hype, and hey, it's nice, Mike. I don't, but I don't cover Colorado, so I don't sit here and talk about Deion. But I will say, Mike, that I think it would be perfect if Florida fires Billy after he loses, 4 of the last 5 games that he's going to lose here in a couple weeks, and give a call to Deion, if not just to troll Florida State. Apparently Deion's out on Florida State as well. So, I mean, I think that makes all the sense of the world. And I think that's the type of move that would shake up the SEC, because I don't know what's wrong with the Florida Gators, Mike, but we've had this conversation many times, but they need some flash. They need some style. They need something. And I think a guy like Deion makes all the sense in the world for the Florida Gators. I think he would have them competing with the likes of Georgia and Alabama sooner than later.
Boy, that would be absolutely head-spinning. Now, Kirby Smart has not given any indications that he's going anywhere. He's still a young guy. I think he is 47. But there will come a time when Kirby moves on. This, believe it or not, this is year 8 for Kirby. And Steve Spurrier was only at Florida 12 years. And not to say I think Kirby's got a 4-year window. But when that time comes, who's the next head coach at Georgia?
Man, that's a tough one.
You got to look deep. You got to look deep in the. He might still be a player. Who knows?
Right. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. So, I mean, because I think it'll be a while. I don't think Kirby's going anywhere, and he doesn't seem to me to be an NFL guy. And that may be the only challenge that's left on him. Maybe he'll want to do something that Nick Saban could never do, and that's win a Super Bowl in the NFL. But Kirby doesn't strike me as, I don't think he's going to do that just to be vindictive or anything or have something over Saban. So I don't see this happening anytime soon, Mike. But man, that is a great question. How about Nick Chubb?
Nick Chubb, there you go. Nick Chubb comes back to Georgia. He would certainly be a popular choice. I was going to say internal hire Glenn Schumann. That maybe Glenn's got a young family. He's had some job opportunities at different levels. Maybe he sticks around another 6 or 8 years and becomes the next head coach in waiting now. So we have talked a lot about the SEC, and we've touched a little bit on the national picture. If you were going to pick the 4 college football playoff teams right now, who do you think the 4 teams are that are going to be in the college football playoffs this year?
Well, that's a great question. I'd have to put Georgia in there. I think that's the only legitimate answer out of the SEC. I would probably.
How much did the game against Kentucky affect your judgment? Before you get into the other schools, how big was that win over Kentucky for you in your mind with looking at evaluating Georgia?
Massive. Because I was leading the charge on Georgia shouldn't be number 1. I don't think they had earned that until Saturday. When, again, I still think Kentucky, they could win. I think they'll probably go 9-3. Their quarterback's got to play a lot better, but I still think they have it in them to be a really good team. Yeah. And Georgia just outclassed them in every manner on Saturday. So that was wildly impressive. I thought Kentucky would cover the spread easily. Georgia easily covered the spread. It was. That game was over. I called it after that first touchdown to St. Jack. I was like, well, thanks for showing up, Kentucky, because it was clear as day. When Georgia shows up, they'll do that to basically anybody. So, yes, Georgia's number 1. They've earned that now. They've shown that. They're not sleepwalking anymore. And to your point, they got guys healthy and all that. So I give you that. How about Oregon? A little bit of a wild card. I think Oregon under Dan Lanning can get there. I think it'd be great to get the Pac-12 back into action here. I know Texas just lost, Mike, but and Sooner fans, and I've been ringing the bell for the Sooners too. I've been wildly impressed with the Sooners. I was stunned that nobody was picking Oklahoma in that game, but I understood it because, heck, I thought Texas would win too. But I don't think that's going to be the one that matters, Mike. I think it's going to be the Big 12 championship. So I think Texas, a little bit of a revenge mode. I think Texas wins the Big 12. Put Texas in there. The more Alabama does, the better that's going to do for Texas. And then last, but, I have no respect for the Big 10. So give me Florida State. I think Florida State looks like a true contender there. Florida State, Georgia, Oregon, and Texas.
Wow, leaving Michigan out. That would mean Michigan and Ohio State would each have to lose a game more than likely. Could happen. So Ohio State struggle with Maryland. We've seen Michigan choke before. And you're right. We're going to find out about Dan Lanning and the Ducks. They're going to play Washington on Saturday. That is going to be quite the showdown. Florida State does look good. They went into Clemson and got a win there. I believe that was the first time in, I want to say 7 or 8 years, Mike. So, hey, before I let you go, tell people where they can find your podcast, because you come with these sort of opinions and insights every week. And again, it's refreshing. It's fun. You don't take yourself too seriously. You just have a really good thing going with your podcast. How can people find it?
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's called That SEC Podcast. We're available on every podcast platform, YouTube, That's really blowing up. And just search SEC Mike, on Google or Twitter or what have you, and I'll pop up. That's what I go by, SEC Mike Bratton. And speaking of not taking myself too seriously, anybody that missed it, so I guaranteed A&M would beat Bama, and I said if Bama wins, I'll dress up like a clown. So our latest show is an hour of me looking like a fool in clown makeup. It's all over the social media. It's all over the YouTube. But they are certainly having a good time with my clownish behavior, to say the least, Mike.
Well, you weren't the only one. I saw, the esteemed Chris Doring, I believe, also. You weren't the only one to get that wrong. I think you're being kind of hard on yourself there, but it is fun to see you and cousin Shane have fun on your co-host. You guys do a really nice job. I know I really enjoyed visiting with you guys, and I guess we were in Nashville this year at the SEC Media Days, and again enjoyed doing your show a couple of weeks ago. So fully, absolutely endorse your product and your opinion. So great job, Mike. I really appreciate you joining me here today. That's going to do it for this week's On the Beat. I want to thank my producer, Kaylee Manzel. Appreciate our sponsor, Engles, coming to you every week, every Monday night. Don't forget, each day at 10 a.m., we have Brandon Adams and Dog Nation Daily. Wednesday, it's Jeff Santel Before the Hedges. Kaylee hosts a program from Marlowe's on Thursday night, Happy Hour. Before the game, we're at Jittery Joe's on Saturdays with Kaylee. And Counter and Coverage is Sunday night. So everyone enjoy the programming. Check out what we've got at dognation.com and have a great week.